young, black. He's about as far from Bowman politically as it gets, despite having a similar background. You know, you're someone who grew up in Crown Heights, a predominantly black neighborhood in New York, attended the HBCU. I don't really think of other Republicans having those type of experiences and that kind of backstory. Do you? And how does that make you unique among the Republican Party?
I mean, as an elected member, yeah, it's pretty unique because, I think typically in America, people tend to follow the political line of their family or their group or their community. And it's very rare for somebody to say, you know what, let me look at something else and decide if I want to follow that or follow this. So that part is rare. I just think that my story, I don't think is unique in terms of America. I think you have a lot of people who grew up in inner cities who have conservative leanings. Like my family is Jamaican. So in the family, we're actually very conservative, but politically, the family would vote Democrat and be registered Democrat. There's that issue in large part of the black community, which I think like the black community is really the conservative side of the Democrat Party. But I don't think that the personal conservatism that I think the black community has is actually shown in votes. And there's a myriad of reasons why that is. And
I want to ask about that. Well, let's start with you personally. What was your Republican origin story to connect what could have been those family conservative values to then you actually going out and identifying as a Republican?
I mean, like, look, my mom, for her, it was about, there are no excuses. Your job is to work hard. She's like, you're a black man growing up in this country. You got to work twice as hard. So that's how she raised me. I think politics came along through my career and through my academic leanings. So
Can you be specific?
Yeah, I majored in finance. So I'm a finance major coming out of college. I worked in banking. I worked in insurance and financial services. So my knowledge of the economy and how it actually works in part has drove my politics. Because really before the age of 30, I was apolitical. I didn't care about politics. I was like most people in the country. I started reading about political philosophy. So I started reading Milton Friedman. I started reading some John Locke, some Montesquieu, or really digging into macroeconomic theory, really started leaning towards the Austrian school of economics, which is F.A. Hayek and Milton Friedman and those guys. And the more I started to dig into those policy sets and really thinking through public policy, not just thinking about it, but thinking it through, that's when I realized I was actually pretty conservative.
You came out of that a free market capitalist. You came out of that a Hayek guy.
Oh, man, I've always been a free market capitalist because I'm a city kid. I mean, look, if you growing up in the inner city,
make that connection for me. I don't know that that's clear to me.
Growing up in the inner city, everybody's hustling. Everybody's trying to get it. Everybody's trying to find a way to make money. Everybody's trying to find a way to get ahead. Everybody's trying to find out what their niche is. That's just what city life was. There was the old song, "Get Money." You had to try to find a way to get money. Because if you're not trying to get money, then what? You're just going to live in your current situation the rest of your life? That doesn't work.
I hear you, but most Black Americans don't reach the conclusion that in the kind of free market capitalist sense that leads to the conservative party. I hear what you're saying about the values being inherent in Black communities, but it's not like they make that next step like you. I mean,
so the way I look at it is my view, my role, I guess what I choose to do is take, the message of conservative policies and what we're doing on Capitol Hill everywhere. That's why I'm sitting and talking to you right now. That's why I go on CNN, I go on MSNBC, I go on Fox, I go on Newsmax. Like I engage with everybody because I think it's important that the value system and the policy set and the political philosophy is explained to all voters, including Black voters, so they can start making real decisions.
I mean, there has been in recent years a real drop off among Black voters with the Democratic Party. I mean, you're talking about transgender issues as off-putting to Black mothers, as abortion as the central issue of the midterms. I hear you talking more about these cultural grievances than I might expect, especially if from someone who came to politics specifically through the economy. It seems to mirror a Republican transition to putting those economic issues on the back burner of other grievances. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair. I think, but those are things that you have to address. Do I want to talk about economics? Of course I do.
I just feel like I've heard Republicans constantly accusing Democrats of being the party of identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels to me like Republicans have become just as much focused on identity and culture as even Democrats. At the minimum, have y'all become what you have accused Democrats of being?
Well, I think that's because politics runs downstream from culture. It begins to dictate what your politics are going to look like, because culture sets the baseline for views and ideas and what are the quote unquote norms. All that comes from culture. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to engage in politics and ignore culture, you do that to your own demise, politically speaking. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be successful because you're not going to understand what's on the mind and what's on the heart of the people that you're trying to represent. So you got to be engaged in culture. You got to understand culture. I think now, if you want to talk about, the focus on wokeness, I mean, can we actually acknowledge the fact that, yes, companies are far more engaged in culture than they ever have in the history of the country before? Like far mm-hmm. more engaged in culture right now.
Yeah, there's been an undeniable post-2020, I think, post-5-year push to have, corporations embrace social progressive platforms. They've been more vocal. I do think that is undeniable. That is true.
It's undeniable. But here's the thing. So if you're in a country that is divided culturally, because let's be clear, the country is divided culturally. So of course, politics is going to weigh into that. I think the issue for Republicans before is that they tried to ignore cultural issues. And what they were focused in was, we just want to talk about less taxes, less government, more freedom. And that was your basic Republican campaign. And that's changed. I mean, obviously, do I think Joe Biden is a good president? No, I do not. I actually made a comment to my colleagues earlier today that what Joe Biden actually masters in is creating crises that he can't solve. That's what he's done. Like, name the issue. It's a crisis in the country. Foreign policy, we're at a crisis point. Why? Because we're involved in a proxy war, a proxy fight in Ukraine. That because if Joe Biden paid attention to the Russian troops amassing on the Ukrainian border for the 6 months prior to the invasion, we probably could have stopped this thing before it started.
But Biden is not someone who leans into kind of progressive social messages. He's someone who ran in 2020 by mm-hmm. creating distance between himself and the progressive wing. Yeah. He's someone who has rejected cause like, defunding police or whatever you would describe the policy platforms of that wing to be. How does he fit in to this version of cultural battleground that you're describing here?
You're talking about what Joe Biden says. I'm telling you about what he does. So your actions say more to me than your words could ever say. And his actions as president have been very progressive, very progressive. Like we say it up here on Capitol Hill, staff is policy. Like you yourself as the candidate can say whatever you want. Your staff is largely going to dictate how the policy is going to come out. The staff at the White House is very left-wing, very left-wing. And so that demonstrates the policy that comes out.
You're saying no matter what Joe Biden says,
look at what he does.
There's the reality of his policy, and there's the reality that he has brought in progressives to the fold, including people like Congressman Bowman, who he sees Biden as a real ally for progressives.
Of course he does, because Joe Biden's doing everything that Jamal wants. That's why he says that. Let me tell you, so there was a time, I think it was about a year ago, this is when the border crisis was really starting to ratchet up. And Joe Biden and the White House put out a proposal about limiting asylum applications. And the squad members were furious. He reversed course and continued doing what he was doing. So, when I talk about politics, I don't just talk about the headlines or the talking points. I bring receipts. I got my information and I know what I'm talking about. So that's how I look at it. That's what I'm telling you. You can't just look at what he says. You got to look at what he does.
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being open to chatting with us and open to taking the questions on. And, I was actually at CPAC where you made that really explicit case around the needs to take the messages to other places. And I think as a reporter, I appreciate politicians who are willing to follow through on that. So thank you.
No problem, man. Take it easy.